Welcome to the Destination Rural podcast series. I'm Peter Rutherford. I'm the CEO of the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. Today we finally get to Tassie with this episode, well overdue, and I'll be talking to Dr. Ben Dodds and Dr. Ashley Brown, who are also a young couple starting in their careers and their life as rural doctors. Okay, so we've got Ben and Ashley from Tassie, and really pleased to be talking to you both. Can I just start with getting a little bit of each of your background stories, where you're from, maybe what led you to rural medicine and where you're working now?
Well, I grew up in North and Northwest Tassie, and then I sort of went to uni here in Tassie as well, and then completed my clinical years of uni up in the Northwest and my internship there. And then we moved up to Launceston the year after that. So we've both probably, I guess, got quite strong connections to the North and Northwest of Tassie, which are both sort of rural areas of Tassie. And it's a really beautiful part of the world, so we really like being there. In terms of working rurally, I guess it was probably going through uni within Tasmania and then going to rural clinical school here really sort of encourages you to go in that direction, and it was really good training and experience, so I was really happy to stay there and sort of stay within our community for ongoing training.
My story would be very similar to Ashley's. I grew up in the northwest of Tassie in a town called Ulverston, and went to school in Devonport, and then made my way down to Hobart for university, and then came back up to the rural clinical school for the clinical years and spent 3 odd years back in the northwest working as a junior doctor. I think the thing that surprised me the most when I was at uni was that I never really considered that I was from a rural area, if that makes sense. So it was a bit of a surprise to hear about this whole world of rural health and rural medicine. But for me, it was just what home was. So there was always this desire to want to go home and work where I grew up, but then learning that that's a whole big world of rural medicine as well was really exciting.
Were you both set on medicine from like high school, or was it something that, whether it's a relative or you met like someone that sort of inspired you? Like, what was the key thing to sort of follow that medicine career option?
Well, we're actually both from we've got no doctors in either of our families. Ben's mum's a nurse, but other than that, we've actually got no other sort of healthcare professionals or anything in our families. So it definitely wasn't really because we'd had, I guess, close experience with family members. I know for me, it was probably the last couple of years of high school when I decided that, I think I want to do medicine. And I think what sort of made that decision for me is that I really like getting to know people, and I really enjoyed the science of the human body as well. So like those two things together just really worked for me. And I haven't really looked back since. I was just really fortunate that I managed to get into uni in Tassie and just, went and did it.
Yeah, I think I was similar. I enjoyed problem solving, and I enjoyed biology at school, and sort of put those two things together as, that's what medicine probably is. Had mum try and talk me out of it because she knows what it's like for doctors working in the healthcare system, but stayed strong and continued on. It was difficult because I was the only one from my school that wanted to do it, and was the only one that was going through the admissions testing and the university application process at the time, and then the only one from my year level who moved down to Hobart to study medicine. So it was tricky because there's a few barriers along the way where you don't have that support that you might do if you're coming from a different sort of school that has quite a few applicants for medicine each year.
And I know you're sort of heading in the rural generalist sort of direction. Ashley, what about you? Have you made decisions, or are you still exploring your options?
I would definitely say I'm still exploring the options. I have narrowed down the options. I definitely know that I want to work rurally, and it works well for us because Ben definitely wants to work rurally, so that's good. But I haven't still decided exactly how that training will look. I'm sort of halfway through a year of obstetrics and gynecology at the moment as a junior doctor, which I'm absolutely loving. So I think that that's definitely going to form a large part of the training that I do, but I just haven't quite committed myself to a pathway yet. And I guess that I just want to make sure that the training that I do eventually do will give me the skills that I need to actually work where we want to work as well.
So other than being cold, what is life like for a rural doctor in Tassie?
Well, I can tell you what, it's not cold in Launceston at the moment. It's been about 30 degrees for the last few days, and for a Tasmanian, that's quite warm.
We're melting.
It's quite hot. I've been sitting inside under the air conditioner for the last couple of days, thinking about all the things I should be doing outside, but haven't quite got to yet. I think Tasmania's unique in that, it's a small state with a small population, but it's still quite spread out. So each population centre is quite small, and then there's a bit of distance between each population site, and it's always fascinating talking to anyone from Queensland and justifying what distance actually is. But in Tasmania, 45 minutes to an hour on crooked roads is actually quite a long way, which when you compare to someone in Queensland who might drive 5 or 6 hours for civilization. So we've got our own unique challenges of what rural medicine is. We've got most of our services centralised in Hobart and Launceston, and then quite a number of district sites throughout the state as well that are usually manned by GP VMOs. And we're looking at trying to expand what rural journalism is in the northwest of Tassie to fulfil some of those long-term workforce shortages and provide better outcomes to the community. So I think rural medicine in Tasmania will change. It's in a transition phase of, we used to have quite a lot of procedural based general practice in the district sites. Things sort of got centralised back to the major hospitals, and now we're trying to decentralise aspects of that advanced area of practice back out to the rural areas.
And I think from a more fun side of things, that a lot of our rural communities where we do have rural doctors are really beautiful. Certainly Ben and I don't take up quite as much of the outdoor activities as other people do, but if you're into like mountain biking and bushwalking and all of that stuff, Tassie is really one of the best places to be for that. And certainly a lot of our rural sites are just in really beautiful parts of Tassie, like the beautiful East Coast, like sort of down in St Helens and things is a really lovely place to work. And then I guess sort of the complete opposite of that on the west coast in Queenstown, which has got really rugged sort of bushwalking terrain down there. So it's certainly like from a lifestyle point of view there's really some good opportunities as well.
There's definitely two different like aspects to the state. There's the east coast, which is a bit drier, a bit more ocean beachside type living, and then there's the west coast, which is definitely the more rugged, wet, temperate rainforests, lots of cool bushwalking up mountains type situation. And you're not that far from anywhere either, which is nice. So you can get to anywhere you want to go within a day, do your adventure and come home again. And we're still lucky enough that we've got all the really nice things that the city would have as well, with nice restaurants and nice parks and lots of fun recreational things to do as well.
And I don't know, I've been to Hobart once, and the number of gin distilleries was the thing that blew my mind. If anyone likes gin, Tassie seems to be the place to go.
We do have a lot of gin, and our local Three Cuts gin actually did just win some big awards. So yes, definitely come here if you like gin, and we've got a lot of wine as well.
And a lot of microbreweries as well. Yeah, I think you can't really drive anywhere in Tassie without coming across a microbrewery on your stop, which is good.
Ben, you mentioned before about, the support and that you had in high school, or, the challenges in relation to getting into medicine. And there's often a lot of talk about, training in rural and whether you get the support or the quality supervision. What would you say your experience and, Ash, your experience in the hospital system has been in relation to that?
My supervision's always been pretty fantastic, even starting as a medical student in the hospital setting. it's always been really good. I think in those smaller teams, you tend to work together quite closely, and especially in the northwest of Tasmania, working as a medical student, you were actually working as part of the team. You were helping them deliver a service, which was quite good for learning. And then moving out into the more peripheral areas in the world of general practice, I actively sought out a practice that would give me a good supervision model. And I think that's one of the main drivers for people choosing where they want to go is, will I get the supervision and training that I think I need? So we had quite a unique model this year where my supervisor actually took on quite a number of registrars and junior doctors as part of the junior doctor training program, and she didn't see any of her own patients. She just supervised us, from 8 till 5, and that was great because if you had a question, you could just knock on the door and ask, or you could just get her in straight away, or if you needed to debrief at the end of the day on a couple of things, you could do that too. So I think for me, supervision is really important and has been something I've actively sought out to, try and help me in my training. And I think overall in rural, it is pretty good to hear quite consistently that people say in rural Australia and rural Tasmania, their supervision and the mentors that they find are really, really good and are really, really passionate.
Yeah, I think I would say there's probably a couple of things. I think through medical school particularly and internship, there are actually, in addition to sort of just the support you get from the hospital, we do have a lot of programs that are literally there to try and encourage junior doctors and medical students to go rural and have the support to go rurally. And I think that does make a really big difference. I think one of the things that I found probably most useful was actually just going to the rural clinical school, where it was just so well, like our rural clinical school here is absolutely fantastic, and they're just so well set up to support students and ensure that you're getting really good learning opportunities throughout university. And actually in our state, our rural clinical school students just perform just so well compared to the rest of the university actually as well. So I think that things like that are really helpful in medical school and those sort of internship years. And I think the other thing that I've found within the hospital, I guess, is that in rural areas, like for us, pretty much everyone is just very keen to support you and to create good training opportunities for you, because they know that they're short-staffed, you're keen to learn, you might be keen to work there. And usually that's a pretty good motivator for people to try and create those really good opportunities for you. And I definitely found, for example, like working in rural ED, that you actually end up with a lot more sort of one-to-one support. So I've sort of done 2 different ED jobs, and the first one I did was up in the northwest when it was pretty much 3 doctors in the ED, and I was an intern. So really it was just me and the consultant working together, which actually was great for me because you got really good, you had just the same person to bounce stuff off. They knew where you were, they were keeping an eye on what you were doing, and that was actually really good. And I found working in a bit of a still small but bigger ED last year, it was actually probably a little bit more difficult in some ways because there were lots of supervisors, but actually trying to find who you should be speaking to, it was actually probably more difficult. And I think that people had less of an awareness of what you're actually doing. So I think that the benefit of smaller hospitals is actually that people will be a bit more accountable for what you're doing and making sure that you're learning.
Do either of you feel like, you look at the experience of maybe people that are training on the mainland and feel like you're missing out being in Tassie or anything like that? Or is there any issues in relation to access to training opportunities, whether it's workshops or, courses, whatever it might be?
So I guess I can speak from less of a ACRM point of view, because Ben will probably speak from that side of things. I think for me, looking at some obstetrics things at the moment, for like a specialty college like that, definitely the training opportunities are different here. And certainly, I think, as you say, with courses and things, they are predominantly run on the mainland, particularly like sort of Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, and not so much here. However, COVID's actually been really great for that because everything's been online. So that's been actually a really positive thing to come out of COVID, is the amount of online resources and learning that we've had access to. I think sometimes, and I think it's probably more from those non-general practice specialties, would be when you look at those colleges and look at the training opportunities, certainly a lot of that is still centred around large metro centres. And I think that to get the training exposure you need for a lot of those colleges, the only way to really do it at the moment is actually to do a component, not necessarily all, but a component of your training in those centres, which is a bit of a shame. And certainly, like, if you look at it from Tassie, we are essentially just an entirely rural state. We've got Hobart, which is like our capital city, but it's still actually not an MMM1 area. So even though it's a tertiary hospital, it's a pretty small tertiary hospital. And so you do actually, like, there is a component of training, even if people are training in Hobart, that they usually need to go to the mainland to access, I think. But on the whole, like, definitely junior doctor years and components of those colleges, and definitely general practice, you can definitely do in Tassie.
I think from a rural generalist perspective, we now have quite a good critical mass of trainees that we're actually bringing a lot of those courses and things like that actually down to Tasmania and getting them organised here. Mm-hmm. And if there's a gap that we've identified, then we can, as a group, go ahead and do something ourselves. So, for example, we organised a procedural skills day at the end of last year to try and help with some of those hard to get logbook type procedures that maybe you'd go off and you get them done over a couple of different courses if you had access to them. But instead we centered on, well, what are the things that we need to get ticked off in simulation for our logbook that we can do, and we can organise as a group with help from facilitators, from the rural hospitals and from the rural clinical school. So I think we are small enough that we can sometimes make our own way, if that makes sense.
So Ben, this is probably a bit towards you. I mean, obviously within general practice, things are going to change. As a ACRM registrar, what's your sense of, the future, I guess, as you head into college-led training? Is it something you're concerned about, something you're pleased about? How are you feeling on that?
I think I'm going to take the positive approach in that I'm excited for opportunities that it might create. Again, Tasmania is unique. There's one state, one health system. We've had one training organisation. It's relatively easy to move around the jurisdictions. Our hospitals are serviced generally by one GP provider. So there are a lot of opportunities to make things work in Tasmania, because we only have, instead of having 3 or 4 different organisations all trying to deliver general practice, general practice training, we now have the opportunity to go, well, from an ACRM perspective, what do we actually want to achieve with rural generalism in Tasmania, and who do we need in the room to try and achieve that? So I'm looking forward to those sorts of conversations to then see, well, how can we improve, the training pipeline from interest and recruitment at a medical student level right through to registrar experience in general practice and advanced skills posts through to post-fellowship opportunities and jobs at the other end, and how they're awarded within the state health system. So I think this is a good time, as Tasmania is starting to build its rural generalism program, to actually capitalise on that transition, specifically from an ACRM perspective, but also the RACGP can have a look at, well, what are some of the other gaps within the not so rural but actually quite in demand regional areas as well. So there are suburbs just outside of Hobart that are absolutely screaming for doctors that aren't considered rural, but have a lower socioeconomic status and have poor access to transport inside the city for other aspects of care, and for all intents and purposes suffer some of the same issues as rural medicine does sometimes. So there's definitely an opportunity there for the RACGP to look at some of those non-rural generalism, but definitely in demand general practice jobs as well. So I am being hopeful and being positive that transition to college-led training will provide new opportunities for us as a state.
Nice. And both of you have been involved in advocacy. So why, and what drew you to it, and why is it important to you to sort of get involved, particularly around rural advocacy?
I think I was reflecting on this the other day, because sometimes you look at your desk and you've got paper everywhere and you're reading this board paper and you're doing this thing and you think, why do I do this to myself for? But I think a lot of it is we spend a lot of time learning what we can do to help patients one-on-one in that emergency department setting or in obstetrics. But actually, when you look at the broader system issues, you can help a lot of patients by looking at some of the underlying structures and governance as to why we actually do things. So for me, there's a bit of a sense of, if something's broken, I can't just walk past it and let it keep breaking, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of things in rural Tasmania that are broken. We're quite disconnected from the rest of the health system. And I think one of my passions is to try and reconnect rural Tasmania back within the healthcare system, and cement our place within the healthcare system as providers of primary care and emergency medicine and advanced skills. And that sort of started quite early on as a medical student, involved in Rustica, which is our rural health club, part of the NRHSN. And that was more about getting students interested in rural careers. And now it's moved into more the Rural Doctors Association space at the Tasmanian and the national level to look at what are some of the broader issues that actually affect rural medicine in Australia and how that translates to the Tasmanian context as well.
I think the thing with advocacy is it's a really nice way of actually trying to do something. So we're all pretty good at complaining about all of the problems that we see all the time at work, or the access problems that we have, or whatever else it might be. I think that advocacy is just a really great way to actually try and address some of those issues. The thing that I found actually really nice, particularly in medical school when I was really quite involved, was just actually how interested people were to hear from you, and particularly as a medical student or a junior doctor or whatever it might be, the representation on a lot of these sort of committees and things is actually fairly poor. So it was actually a really exciting space to work in, because people were actually really excited to hear from what you had to say. And I think for both of us still at the moment, because we're just sort of still really at the start of our careers, people really want to know what you have to say, because all of these changes that we are trying to make now, by the time they're actually all implemented, 5, 10, 20 years, however long it will take, it's going to be us that's affected. So it's really exciting to get to actually influence what you're going to be walking into, essentially. And I think that advocacy for rural areas is just a really important part of providing healthcare for those areas, because I think if you didn't have advocacy, our access in rural areas would just be so much worse than what it is.
It's almost inbuilt into rural doctors to be advocates. I think they're always advocating for their patients at the individual level, but also advocating for their communities on a broader level, and then advocating for system change above that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, where you might be, like how the advocacy now might impact on you in the future. So where do you see yourselves in about 5 years' time?
5 years' time is actually probably the trickiest question for us. Certainly into the future, when we've both finished training, which for Ben's not actually that long away, we want to ultimately end up in Tassie. We've both got really pretty strong connections to Tassie. Our families are both here. It's where we've grown up, and certainly it's sort of our community. So that's definitely where we want to end up in the long term. 5 years, I say, is a bit tricky because I haven't kind of figured out my training pathway yet, and depending what I do, I suspect that there may be a bit of moving around involved to get those skills that I need. And for both of us, we'd like to just also get some experience elsewhere for a short amount of time, just to sort of see how things are done differently in a different state, and hopefully bring that back to here so that we've kind of got extra experience and skills. But I guess what it looks like for us in the future is in a rural town with a rural hospital somewhere, working is the plan, with a little bit of land and a house and a dog.
Don't forget the dog. Do you feel pressure to stay rural, like because you were so sort of connected to rural, like as a medical student, that do you feel a certain pressure to stay rural, or is it something that you're just so passionate about and that you love the environment that that doesn't even come into it, that's where you're heading anyway?
It's interesting in Tasmania because there's so many gradients of rural. You could be in Burnie, which is not, I don't think, particularly rural compared to Queenstown, but you're still fulfilling that dream of being a rural doctor. Or you might be on King Island, where your only way out is on the plane, and that's really rural. So there's different gradients of rural, and I think it depends on what you want at the time of your life that you're in, and that will change. I think there'll always be an element for rural for us, but we might change what rural looks like over time.
I think ultimately for us, the city is just like, big cities has just never held any appeal whatsoever as a place to live or a place to work. We both just really love being in smaller communities and smaller hospitals. And I don't think that's really ever been a question for us. I think certainly there could be, as Ben said, times where we move to less rural areas based on like what's going on in life and family and all of those things. But there's just not really the question that either of us ever wanted to work like long term in a huge hospital in the middle of a city. It's just not the lifestyle and jobs that either of us want. I think interesting you say pressure. I think there probably is a sense of expectation to work in rural areas, but I don't think it's really a problem because that's what we want to do anyway. But there probably is the expectation there a little bit, and I think it would be a bit, probably given what we've both done, it would be a bit funny if we just turned around and ended up in the city for the rest of our lives, but I don't think it's going to happen.
So not heading to Potts Point anytime soon, Ben?
No.
Okay, we're going to do a bit of quick fire round. So just say the first thing that pops into your head. It can be more than one word, so don't stress about that, and you can explain it a little bit. Favorite holiday destination?
Who's going first? You go first.
I can go first. I was going to say Palm Cove.
I was going to say Scotland.
Oh, that's okay. You trumped me there.
Okay, best part about rural medicine?
Teamwork and people.
Yeah, I think clinical exposure, the community and the team you get to work with.
Your least favourite or most challenging part of rural medicine?
Trying to explain to people who are in the tertiary emergency department what you can and can't do and why they just need to help you instead of putting up barriers.
Yeah, I think access to those more specialised services when you need them is really difficult, and resources in rural areas is definitely an ongoing difficulty.
Favourite drink?
I really like a local winery we have nearby called Joseph Cromie. They have very nice Pinot Gris. That would be probably my favourite.
Gin and tonic, any kind.
Yeah. Best piece of advice you've been given, and this probably isn't so much of a quick fire round, just the best piece of advice you've been given that's made your life as a rural doctor a little bit easier.
My supervisor did say to me last year, she said, sometimes you don't need to know what's going on, you just need to know whether you're comfortable managing it or not. So don't worry about the nitty gritty trying to figure out the ECG or the electrolyte abnormality or this weird thing on the blood gas. Just if they look crook and they can't be in your hospital, then use that gut instinct and go with it. So that was good, because sometimes you can get caught on minute details when the bigger picture, it doesn't actually really matter. You just have to deal with the situation in front of you.
I don't know if I have a specific main piece of advice that I've been given. I think working in rural health, I think that there's a lot of challenges that get thrown your way, but I think it's important just to get to know the people in your hospital and in your network, because if you get to know them, you'll have the support behind you to try and get through some of those issues. And certainly as problems crop up within the hospital, if you have actually got to know people and made the effort to help them, you'll have a lot of support behind you to get those sorted out, particularly if it's, you've got a complicated patient or something and you need help from social work and you need help from nursing staff to get X, Y, and Z happening. I think making those relationships early is nice for your social life, but it's also really good for work life as well, to get to know people.
And I guess just to sort of finish up, how important is it to have a life outside of work?
It's very important, and it's something that we actually are both constantly working on. And I think that probably a lot of doctors could say the same thing. It's a challenging thing, and I think it's really challenging, particularly when you're really part of your community and you're really close with your community, is that it can be really hard to leave work at work. And certainly we've both been guilty very often of bringing a lot of work home with us. But I think it's really important to make the time each day just to at least, a small part of your day, if you're doing something that's not thinking about work or not doing work or not doing other activities related to work, and actually just make sure you've got some kind of something that you can fall back on outside of it. For me, I really like going out in the garden, going for a walk, and that really helps just to clear my head and sort of just settle me, and give me something else to do.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I need to stop doing so many things. I have no good advice because I need to take the advice.
All right, so if anyone's got good advice, they can send it your way, Ben.
That would be good.
All right, well, we're going to finish up, but thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and really enjoyed the chat. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, Peter.